Welcome to Modern Manna's Health and Healing Crusade. Through the years, Modern Manna has been dedicated to spreading the message of physical, mental, and spiritual restoration through the gospel of Jesus Christ. From cooking schools and nutritional counseling, to Bella Vita, a lifestyle education home, to crusades featuring world-renowned teachers and healers, Modern Manna has inspired thousands to embrace a new lifestyle that promotes health and the reversal of sickness and disease, resulting in a life filled with joy and peace. Join us now as Dr. Neal Barnard presents Breaking the Food Seduction.
World-class speakers, doctors, scientists. I got goosebumps all over my body right now because I'm just thankful to God that we can bring people like Neal Barnard here to Lodi. When I think of acronyms, I think of PCRM. It stands for the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. And Dr. Neal Barnard comes from Washington, D.C., and he's not only a researcher, but he's very, very publicly active in politics, politically active, to see that the changes in diet and health are made here in this country. He also is on the faculty of George Washington University, and the NIH is funding a diabetic trial showing if a vegan diet will retard the disease diabetes. The NIH. He has published numerous original research papers, published in medical journals. He's the author of 8 books, which he'll talk about today, his newest. He's been with me on Healthline a number of times. He's a physician. And I love his information. I love his gift. He says, my fee to come is 0, Danny. And when I told him that our fee to come here is 0, his eyes locked to my eyes and he patted me on the back. He says, I share the same vision. I don't want to turn away anybody from hearing this message for $1. So he comes from Washington, D.C., the president of the Physicians Committee of Responsible Medicine, with 5,000 doctors in his organization, supporting the CHIPS program. He's a great guy, a kind, gentle man. But he too has a mission, and he wants to see people alive and well to prevent the diseases that are crippling Americans. He's a pioneer, and he is on the move to make changes. Let's give a warm welcome to Dr. Neal Barnard from the Physicians Committee of Responsible Medicine.
Is that better? Can you hear in the back? If you haven't If you have any trouble hearing in the back, wave your arms. I won't see you, but you'll get great aerobic exercise. So, in the research studies that we do, we find that people once in a while, in the course of changing their diets, sometimes people get stuck. There's some food that we have trouble breaking away from. It might be chocolate or cheese or meat or something like that. And we find almost inevitably people end up blaming themselves. It's my weak will, it's my oral personality, I was dropped as a child, some problem like that. Or they blame their job, or they blame their family, or whatever. Well, I'm going to suggest something quite different. Our research studies have shown that the foods themselves actually have some power over us that we may not have imagined, and I'd like to describe that to you. First, let me take a little bit of a diversion. How to magnetize a baby. Start with a baby, 9 to 12 weeks of age, and sit face to face 15 inches apart. Take 1 teaspoon sugar, 1 cup of water, mix it together, take the pacifier, stick it into the sugar water, plop it in the baby's mouth. Wait 3.5 minutes, and you're done. You have magnetized the baby. Walk out of the room. Come back 10 minutes later with as many other people as you like, and you discover the baby will not look at any of them. The baby will focus only on you. The baby will be sort of cooing and gurgling at you, focusing on your face, and throwing you a little bit of a seductive shoulder. What has happened is that the taste of sugar on the baby's tongue triggered a nerve impulse from the tongue to the base of the brain so that opiate chemicals are released inside the brain. They, in turn, are the domino that knocks over the next domino in the brain, which is dopamine, the primary feel-good chemical in a baby's brain, just like in an adult's brain. We triggered it with sugar. Now, the baby is naturally able to detect sweet tastes because breast milk is very lightly sweet to the baby's tongue. And so nature obviously allows the baby to enjoy that so that the baby breastfeeds. Well, sucrose or table sugar is much sweeter and triggers this exaggerated response that effectively drugs the baby. Now, of course, this has a lot of practical value for grandparents or aunts and uncles, but the issue is that we're actually eliciting a reaction in babies, also in adults, with this substance. Now, sugar has been shown to reduce crying in healthy newborns. It reduces the visible reaction to heel stick and also to circumcision when that's done. What I mean is you dribble a little sugar water into the baby's mouth before you stick their heel to draw blood. They don't cry as much. I'm not necessarily recommending this. What I'm suggesting is that we are showing that this food has a drug-like effect. However, if the baby's mother was a heroin addict or addicted to other opiates, sugar doesn't do anything at all. We understand why that is? Because the baby has been bathing in opiates throughout gestation and is immune to the effects of sugar, basically. Okay, but sugar is not, I don't mean to say that sugar is necessarily a terrible, terrible thing, but it does act like an addicting food, and it's not the only one. Chocolate, for some folks. For other folks, cheese. And for some people, meat. Now let's just walk through these a little bit. For adults, we don't generally drink sugar water, but we get our sugar in different ways, and we get our own reactions to it. Now, some people will say, well, I'm addicted to carbohydrates. I just can't avoid all those starches. Well, actually, not really true. We're addicted to them if it's sugar itself, simple sugar, which is the simplest form of carbohydrates, or those carbohydrates that break into sugar very quickly, which is only really just white bread, potatoes, or breakfast cereals. And for many people, you don't have to worry about these at all. If you're not overdoing it, don't worry about them. These are healthy foods. Now, we can also get hooked on sugar-fat mixtures, like cookies or cakes or pies, and sugar-caffeine mixtures, like sodas, or these new special coffees that seem to be everywhere nowadays, and of course chocolate, which contains both sugar and caffeine. Now, if you take Coca-Cola, A typical 20-ounce bottle, which is the kind that's sold nowadays, has about 68 grams of sugar, 78 milligrams of caffeine, which is almost as much as a cup of coffee, and about 250 calories. Now, when I was a kid growing up in Fargo, North Dakota, we had 6-ounce bottles of cola, and we only had them on special occasions. It wasn't a daily sort of thing. When I was at school, we didn't have a soda machine. After our gym classes, we would line up at the water fountain. That was the beverage that we used. And I remember my mother saying, you know, we have these 12-ounce cans now, and I can't finish the whole thing. She would look around for some kind of stopper to stop up the can to save it for the next day. Well, serving sizes went up to 16 ounces and now 20-ounce bottles, and it's fair to say that nobody is really saving half for the next day. What I'm suggesting is that we use this substance rather like an addictive drug, where we're seeking out our dose and then staying there. This is from the Coca-Cola website, justifying why they add caffeine to it. It's not addictive. That is what we call a lie. Okay, but now the question is sugar a problem? Well, if you have it once in a while, it's hard to say that it really is a problem. But 2 chocolate chip cookies, maybe 90 calories, a soda, 250 calories, that whole bag of Twizzlers, oops, we're starting to get off the scale. So if it is, then we're going to want to break that sugar seduction. Okay, let's shift gears. I want to talk about another food. Help me out if you would. I want you to tell me when you spot the addicting food. No? Oh, there it is. No, we like bananas, we like cauliflower. There it is, okay. Well, what is it about chocolate? Chocolate does behave like an addicting food. And if I take this drug, this is called Narcan or naloxone. It's used in emergency rooms. When a person has had a heroin overdose and they come in moribund into the emergency room, we stick a needle in their arm and fill them full of Narcan. It blocks the opiate receptors in their brain so that the heroin no longer affects them. They wake up. If I take a chocolate addict and I use this very same drug and I block their opiate receptors, chocolate is like dry bread. You'll eat it if you're hungry, but you won't overdose on it, you won't binge on it, you won't knock over a 7-Eleven late at night to get it. You won't plug quarters into the candy machine with that mixture of humiliation and regret that people feel over any kind of addiction. This drug blocks opiate receptors. Now, I'm not suggesting this is a treatment. What I'm suggesting is we use this as a research tool to show that it's not the taste. It is the brain effect that counts. And chocolate, just like sugar, elicits an opiate reaction within the brain that trips those dopamine receptors, gives us the pleasure response. But it does more than that, doesn't it? If you open up a box of chocolate cookies and you have just one, about 5 minutes later, your hand hits the bottom of the bag. You didn't intend that to happen, but opiates also stimulate the appetite a little bit. So if you weren't terribly hungry, have you experienced this? You know, if you weren't that hungry before, you will be once you start, and the foods are stronger than you are. Now, researchers, at the University of Michigan, Adam Drunowski did an interesting study where he tested a variety of foods using this naloxone blockade, and he found that with corn chips and jelly beans and popcorn, he really couldn't detect much of an opiate effect. But he could with chocolate chip cookies and Jell-O and marshmallows and the other foods you see. And Lorna Doones and M&Ms and Oreos and Snicker bars, well, they really had quite a significant opiate effect. So again, what I'm suggesting is it's not just weak will or these sorts of things. It's a chemical effect of foods. Now, chocolate has more than an opiate effect. It also has caffeine. Not a lot, but it has a little bit. And it has a related stimulant called theobromine. Theobromine, any of you have dogs and the vet said, don't give chocolate to your dog? It's because of theobromine. It can kill dogs. It's a powerful stimulant as far as they're concerned. And there's much, much more of it than there is caffeine in chocolate. There's also another amphetamine-like chemical called phenylethylamine. And eating chocolate slows the breakdown of a chemical called anandamide in the brain, which is the same chemical that mediates the effect of marijuana on the brain. Now, I don't mean to say that chocolate is a drug, What I mean to say is it's the whole darn drugstore, all inside one wrapper. Okay, but it's not the only addiction. In a research study we recently did, 59 postmenopausal women went on a totally vegan diet for 14 weeks. And after 14 weeks, I asked them, what are you missing now? They didn't have any meat, they didn't have any dairy, they didn't have any eggs. We kept vegetable oils very, very low. And when we asked them, what do you really miss? They didn't miss ice cream, especially. They didn't miss a cold glass of milk with Oreos. What they really missed more than anything else, surprisingly enough, was cheese. Have you noticed that when people go vegan, for some reason, cheese kind of lingers on in their mind? They wake up about 4:30 in the morning dreaming of cheese pizza with those melty strings coming down. Well, I wondered what this is about, and this is what actually set me on this mission of trying to understand why is cheese addicting. And the first thing I discovered is back in 1981, a researcher named Eli Haslam at the Wellcome Research Laboratories in Research Triangle Park, North Carolina, found a substance that looked very much like morphine in cow's milk. Now, there wasn't a lot of it, but they did a lot of tests and found out eventually that it didn't just look like morphine, it actually was morphine. Cows have, just how poppy flowers, they have the enzymes that make opiates, opium, you've heard of opium poppies. Well, cows also have enzymes in their liver that make morphine and also make codeine. And tiny bits of these narcotics will end up in milk more in the spring than the fall. It's intermittent, and it's not a lot, and it's probably not the reason why milk products have a little bit more sway over people. What seems to be more important is something called casomorphins. Have you heard of casein? Casein, C-A-S-E-I-N. Casein is the primary milk protein. It's a long string. All proteins are strings of beads. Each bead is an amino acid. And when you digest proteins in your digestive tract, your enzymes snip them into individual beads. Each of these individual amino acids goes into your bloodstream and helps you to build body tissue. Except that when you ingest casein, it doesn't break apart into individual amino acids. It breaks into strings of 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7 amino acids. These little chains have drug-like effects, and they're called casomorphins, casein-derived, morphine-like compounds. They act like opiates, they act like narcotics, and the most powerful of them has about 1/10 the opiate effect of morphine. Now, it's not enough that, don't get me wrong, you're not going to drive funny. You're not going to go out on a street corner offering people Velveeta. But what you will experience, people who do a lot of cheese, they very often get constipated, which happens to be exactly the same thing that happens if you've ever been in the hospital for an operation and they gave you Demerol or any other narcotic. One of the principal reasons people don't like those is they get very constipated and bound up. It's the opiate effect on the intestinal lining itself. Now, there are a variety of these, and researchers have been teasing them apart. The dairy industry has been aware of them for 20 years or more, but I would hazard a guess that not one person in this room has ever heard of these opiate-like substances that are in dairy products. Now, why cheese? When I take milk and convert it to cheese, what I'm doing is I add something to curdle the solids, so that they lump together, and I squeeze out all the water, all the lactose, all the whey proteins, which go along with the water, and I'm left with pure casein and fat. So cheese is potentially the most addicting form of the substance. I think we're onto something here. Now, to show you how peculiar things have gotten, back in the 1980s, researchers discovered that human breast milk has casein also. Not as much as in cow's milk, but there's some there. And in some women, after they've given birth, their own breast milk releases little bits of casein into their own blood. I'm not talking about milk that she's drinking, I'm talking about her own breast milk. It gets into her blood, breaking apart into casomorphins, and occasionally in some women, the concentration of these casomorphins gets very, very, very high. They get a toxic effect in their brain where they become psychotic. What I'm suggesting here is that postpartum psychosis, which isn't very common, but it does occur. I'm suggesting that it is not due to the burdens of raising a child. It's not due to sleeplessness and the pain of childbirth. What I'm suggesting is a toxic effect in the brain from the same sort of chemical that people who are ingesting dairy products every day might experience as well, albeit to a dramatically different degree. Are you with me? Is this making some sense? Okay. So where are we? We're not at the end of our journey. We're at the beginning. We've just thrown open the door to understanding why is it that I like an apple but I'm not hooked on it. After a workout or it's a hot day, we love a juicy apple, some oranges, a bowl of cherries, a banana. These are delicious things, but they aren't things that we tend to binge on. We don't go crazy for them. But on the other hand, sugar we do. Chocolate we do. Cheese we do. If we imagine that there isn't a drug-like effect on our brains, we're really denying ourselves the reality. So where we are with casomorphins, though, we don't know to the extent to which they're absorbed from the digestive tract into the bloodstream and to the brain. We know that in a calf, the casomorphins form in the digestive tract, they do get into the blood, and they go to the infant's brain. We know that in a human baby, same story. The human baby who breastfeeds feels nourished, looks happy and content, and falls asleep. And we thought it was our lullabies and cooing that was doing that. Well, it actually is a drug-like effect from the mother's milk itself. We're now looking at the extent to which this happens in adults. Well, do we want to break the cheese seduction? Well, let's look at some numbers. Calorie content, this is just 2 ounces. This is just one single sandwich. Fair amount of calories, 190 for brie, 228 for cheddar. The fat content is worrisome in itself, and it's mostly bad fat. It's mostly the saturated fat that causes our cholesterol levels to rise. The cholesterol content itself, this is just 1 ounce, is as high as a steak, ounce per ounce. So when people get stuck at the cheese phase of vegetarianism, they're not doing nearly as well for themselves as when they break free and get to the foods at the bottom of this list, beans and grains and vegetables and fruits, which have 0 cholesterol, very, very little fat. Okay, now for many folks, what really convinces them that breaking the cheese seduction is a good idea is that they had some arthritis. And have any of you experienced this? That you had what you thought for all the world was classic rheumatoid arthritis. But when you changed your diet, something happened you didn't expect. Did any of you have experienced this? You find your joints lighten up. In some cases, it goes away completely, but then you drift away from your diet, your joints start grinding again. It turns out that not in every case, but in many cases, foods are the trigger, and dairy products, of all the triggers, dairy products is the most common. It's not the fat, it's the protein that we're reacting to. Migraines, same story. If any of you have had migraines, is this not true? That certain foods will trigger it, and cheese is one of the most common? Digestive problems, very, very common. I've seen so many people who thought they had irritable bowel syndrome, that they were going to have it for the rest of their life. When they got away from dairy, they were much better. Perhaps the thing that has concerned me the most is prostate cancer. Have you seen this research suggesting that milk-drinking men are at a higher risk of prostate cancer? Hormone effects from milk seem to trigger this process. If we look at countries that are further on the right of this slide, those countries that consume a lot of milk, as you can see, there's a lot of variability, but they tend to have a higher rate of prostate cancer. At the Physicians' Health Study at Harvard University, which is about 21,000 physicians, those who got about 2.5 servings of dairy products a day had 34% increased risk of prostate cancer. Harvard did another study with health professionals, not physicians. They call it Health Professionals Follow-Up Study. This is chiropractors, pharmacists, podiatrists, everybody other than physicians, nearly 48,000 of them. And what they found is that those who had 2 servings of milk per day or more had about a 60% increased risk of prostate cancer. Now, why? The first thought was, well, it must be that if I have more fat on my plate, or a glass of milk, which is about 50% fat as a percentage of calories, that fat stimulates my body to make more testosterone. That's true. High-fat diets cause the production of testosterone. That's going to increase our risk of prostate cancer. But there's something else. There's something called insulin-like growth factor. When a man drinks more milk, or a woman drinks more milk, this substance called IGF-1, insulin-like growth factor, forms in their blood, and it in turn stimulates the growth of cancer cells. I think this is probably the place that we should be looking more than anything else. This study was done by Robert Heaney, working for the dairy industry, and what he showed was that in men and women, middle age and older, if they asked them to consume 3 servings of milk every day, their serum level of IGF-1 went up about 10%. Insulin-like growth factor stimulates the growth of cancer cells. Okay. At Harvard, when they looked at the men who had developed prostate cancer and they went back to when they were healthy, what they found was that their IGF-1 levels were actually high at the very beginning. Let me just walk you through the slide. The blood samples were drawn in 1982. Nobody had cancer yet. But they assessed them over the next 10 years, and all of those men who developed prostate cancer subsequently actually had, when they looked at their average IGF-1 blood levels, they were higher than the men who stayed healthy later. So this substance, IGF-1, is turning out to be a lot like cholesterol in the sense that you can measure a cholesterol level and tell if a person is more likely to have a heart attack. If you measure IGF-1 in their blood, you can determine if they're more likely to develop certain forms of cancer, especially prostate cancer and breast cancer. And what raises it? Dairy products seem to be probably the biggest actor. Now, our government isn't necessarily helping us at every step of the way. The federal government actually worked with the dairy industry to release, I'm not making this up, Wendy's Cheddar Lovers Bacon Cheeseburger. The government decided that the dairy farmers needed a little bit better income than they had, and so they worked with Wendy's to release the Cheddar Lovers Bacon Cheeseburger, and during the promotion period alone, they sold over 2 million pounds of cheese, 380 tons of fat, and more than a ton of pure cholesterol going right down our esophagus. But they didn't stop there. Subway's had a couple of sandwiches that didn't have cheese on them, and they put a stop to that. They took, at Pizza Hut, an entire pound of cheese and added it to just one pizza and called that the ultimate cheese pizza. And if you go to Burger King or Taco Bell, you find cheese is on just about everything. Now, the dairy industry is acting an awful lot like the tobacco industry. You've heard about how the tobacco industry has spiked its products to make them extra addicting. They know that nicotine is the active ingredient. Well, the cheese industry has known about the addictive power of casein for a long period of time, and they've actually split people into 2 groups. Cheese enhancers are people who just can take it or leave it. You'll just use cheese as an enhancement to your spaghetti, throwing a little bit on top. But the cheese cravers, that's the group that they want. These are the folks who don't stand on ceremony. They eat it straight out of the package. My group, the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, through the Freedom of Information Act, we went to the federal government and got the plans the dairy industry, I'm not making this up, got the plans the dairy industry had used to try to attract cheese cravers and keep them addicted to this product. This was a Cheese Forum, December 5th, 2000. Who are those cheese lovers? And they've identified the cheese cravers as the heaviest consumers. They're aged 25 to 54. They consume it as is, straight out of the package. And they're willing to eat more than they already do. They're white collar, smaller families. And so what do we want our program to do? We want to trigger that cheese craving. And they went into elaborate detail how they were working with Subway and Wendy's and other restaurant chains. Why? Because if you make one decision for Wendy's, you've got this product in every single community in America. If you do it at Burger King or McDonald's, you're controlling what people are offered everywhere. And it's worked to a dramatic degree. This was the final slide that Dick Cooper used in his presentation, where it's a playground slide. And there are spiders weaving a web across the bottom. And one spider says to the other, "If we pull this off, we'll eat like kings." Well, they did. Back in 1975, when I was about to start medical school, cheese consumption was 15 pounds per person per year. Well, today it's over 30 pounds per person per year, and that's for every man, woman, and child in America, and I'm not eating any, so somebody's having mine. So the amount has gone up. Now, the last seduction is meat. Now, for many women, it's chocolate or sweets. For men, it's often a different story. For men, say, the last food I'm ever going to give up is my steak. You know what I'm talking about. So researchers back in April 2000 did an interesting study. They asked a group of men, would you give up meat for a week if I paid you $1,000? Now, if I asked you, could you give up raspberries for a week? Could you give up peanuts for a week? Sure. You wouldn't need to be paid $1,000 for it. But oddly enough, when you ask people if they would give up meat for a week, about 1 in 4 white Americans said no. About 1 in 4 black Americans said no. Now, with Asian Americans or Hispanic Americans, the numbers were much less, which I take to mean that non-meat foods are more a part of their culture. Well, it turns out that if I use that same drug I was describing earlier, naloxone, which is the trade named Narcan, and I take a devoted meat lover and I give them this drug, what you suddenly discover is they'll still eat it if they're hungry, but their interest in it diminishes. They eat less ham, less salami, less tuna, and all of these different foods they're eating less and less of. Is it a good idea to break the meat seduction? Really, no question. There's almost no food for which we have better evidence of serious risks. And you've seen Dean Ornish's research work, right? It shows if you get away from the meat and you go on a vegetarian sort of diet, you can actually reverse heart disease without any drugs, without surgery. Your average vegetarian weighs about 10% less than the average meat eater. The cancer risk is cut by about 40%. Blood pressure diminishes. Diabetes improves. Have you heard of the new research on Alzheimer's disease? Have you seen this? There's some evidence that if you get your cholesterol down, and you know the best way of doing that, using a vegetarian diet, that the risk of Alzheimer's diminishes. If you reduce saturated fat intake, I'm talking about animal fat intake, the risk of Alzheimer's diminishes. And when we follow a diet very rich in vegetables and fruits, so we're getting folic acid and vitamin B6, along with vitamin B12, which you want to supplement, that breaks up homocysteine in the blood, also reducing the risk of Alzheimer's disease. Now, I have to tell you, people follow all different kinds of vegetarian diets. And the healthiest diet is a vegan diet. And for anybody who's new to this, a vegan is not a person from the planet Vegas. It's simply a person on a pure vegetarian diet. And then there are a lot of folks are on an ovo-lacto vegetarian diet. Ovo meaning eggs, lacto meaning milk, of course. But you don't have fish or chicken or beef. And then once in a while I run into somebody who says, well, I'm pretty much vegetarian. But I do have eggs and I have dairy products and fish and sometimes chicken. And I hardly ever have any red meat. And I call them the ovo-lacto-pesco-polo vegetarians. But of this group, the folks who do best by far are the vegans. And so the closer we get to that, the better off we are. However, I have discovered that there are some parts of the United States where this message it just doesn't go over too big. I was giving a talk in Lubbock, Texas a few years ago, and I was invited to Texas Tech University to talk about some of the new research that had been coming out, and I noticed that anytime I talked about vegetarian diets, the audience started grumbling a little bit, and they were sort of elbowing each other, and what's all this about? And as the din got louder and louder, it suddenly hit me that here in Lubbock, Texas Tech University is an agricultural school where they have classes like Swinology 101, and they have people go there to learn how to become livestock ranchers. But I realized, my grandfather was a cattle rancher, and my uncles and my cousins are all still in that same business. If you go through the Midwest, you see Barnard stock farms, and they're decent folks, and they're at risk for heart attacks and cancer and diabetes and weight problems, just like everybody else. So I wanted to make sure that this audience heard the message. But the longer I went on, the louder they got, heckling and booing, and it got to the point you just couldn't hear my lecture anymore. So I finally just had to say, look, you guys, you can heckle me as much as you want to, But this process of atherosclerosis, this hardening of the arteries that comes from a lifetime of eating beef and other high-fat foods, it doesn't just cause heart attacks. It can also make you impotent. And I have to tell you, I had their complete attention for the rest of my lecture. Now, I was not making this up. If you block, you know how when you eat a diet high in saturated fat and cholesterol, you get artery blockages forming, and they form in the coronary arteries to the heart muscle, and you end up with a heart attack. They can form in the carotid arteries to the brain, and you have a stroke. They can form in the arteries to the legs, giving you a condition called claudication or leg pains. But they can also, the male sexual anatomy is dependent on vigorous blood flow. It's a peculiar hydraulic system that was obviously devised on a Monday. And if you don't get good blood supply, it just doesn't function anymore. And cardiologists learned a long time ago that a man who comes in his mid-50s complaining about his nature not being what it used to be, they take that seriously because that man with impotence in midlife has a 1 in 4 risk of heart attack or stroke within 2 years. It's just a sign that he has artery blockages. That's not going to kill him, but the heart attack will, or the stroke will. So at the end of my lecture in Lubbock, I had all these guys in 10-gallon hats and snakeskin boots coming up for my macho tofu recipes and power brown rice. And I suddenly discovered, why am I talking about prostate cancer? These men don't have prostates, or they don't know they have them, and they probably may not be able to spell it or whatever, but they'll learn all that later. For now, there are certain other things that they care about, and that's what we should really be focusing on for young folks. What was I talking about? Okay, anyway, it's a good idea. Oh, here's the most important thing. A lot of folks say, I don't eat any red meat at all. You've heard this. I don't eat red meat, but I eat chicken. Let me give you the numbers. The leanest beef is 29% fat as a percentage of calories. The leanest chicken, about 23%. Fish vary. Some are lower, some are higher. But look at broccoli, look at beans and rice. Those are the low-fat foods, really low, and they have 0 cholesterol. So if you have a loved one and you want to help them to live longer, or if you yourself want to reverse your heart disease, and you just go from beef to chicken, have you done anything at all? Really not. And the studies show you don't reverse heart disease, you don't really lose a substantial amount of weight until you get down to those power foods, and that's the bottom of this slide. Now, breaking free. Start with I'm just going to walk you really quickly through what do we do about all of this. And then if any of you have some questions, I'd be glad to take them. And we have copies of Breaking the Food Seduction for you in the back also. But to break free, start with a healthy breakfast. Now, when I was a kid growing up in Fargo, my mom had 5 kids. And we'd come down to the smell of bacon. She would have the bacon strips in a big frying pan, and she would serve that with eggs. And we had some clues that might not have been the very healthiest breakfast, because when the bacon was really hot, she'd take it out with a fork and put it on a paper towel to drain. And the hot grease that was left in the frying pan, she would very carefully pour that into a jar and save it. Now, she didn't put it in the refrigerator. She just put it on the shelf because she knew that as that bacon grease turned cool, what happens to it? It hardens up, it solidifies, and that is a sign that it's loaded with the saturated fat that drives up your cholesterol, blocks your arteries, and ultimately kills you. And there's a fair amount of it in beef. Chicken fat is 30% saturated fat. You know, Americans eat 1 million chickens per hour. Thinking this is health food, we have 4,000 heart attacks a day. We are the worst shape we have ever been as a country. So, start with a healthy breakfast. This also does not mean just a bagel. A high-fiber breakfast, like some old-fashioned oatmeal, not instant oatmeal. You have the old-fashioned kind that has all that fiber in it. And by the way, I'm a doctor, I'm not a chef, but I do know one tip. And that is when you buy old-fashioned oatmeal, ignore the package instructions. They tell you to take say 2 cups of water and heat it to boiling and then sprinkle in the oatmeal. And if you do that, it comes out like little rocks. Instead, start with all the ingredients cold. 1 part oatmeal, 2 parts water. It's all cold in your saucepan. Gradually heat it up, stirring while you do. And then when it explodes, of course, you have to wipe it off your countertop, which I don't know why that happens to be every morning. And But anyway, it comes out very nice and creamy. That's the way to make it. Start with it cold, heat it up gradually, stir it up, and you'll have a great breakfast. You don't have to put anything on it. A little cinnamon and raisins or some strawberries if you want to. Have a half a cantaloupe. If you have toast, you might find that you really like rye bread or pumpernickel bread. They're richer and they cause a much more even blood sugar later in the day. Use certain foods to keep your blood sugar steady. Beans, whole grains, green leafy vegetables are good. I have lots more details on this I can share with you if you like. Leptin. Have you heard of leptin? Leptin. Leptin is your appetite shutoff switch. Leptin is leptin is a hormone. It's in your blood. It turns down your appetite. And many people have no leptin or very little leptin in their blood. Why? Because they've been dieting. If you're dieting, your body thinks you're starving, and it stops making leptin because it doesn't want to shut off your appetite. It wants you to go back to eating again. Are you with me? It's understandable? Okay. So here's what happens. I was really good yesterday. I only ate 500 calories all day. The problem is today, I reacted by binging. Somehow the donut tray looked so much more attractive to me today. It's because I was starving, my body stopped making leptin, and we binged today. So don't do that. I have a rule of 10. The rule of 10 says this. If you are, and you don't need to calorie count. I encourage people not to. But if you are calorie counting, take your ideal body weight, multiply by 10. Whatever number that gives you is your calorie minimum. So I should weigh, let's say I should weigh 150 pounds. I multiply by 10, what do I get? I get 1,500 calories. Now, I should be eating much more than that, especially if I'm physically active, but I must never eat less than that. So I'm a bigger guy. Let's say I should weigh 200 pounds. I need how many calories a day? At least 2,000, probably much more, but this number isn't your recommendation. This is your minimum. Always go above that. If you ever go below, you don't have enough leptin in your blood to keep your appetite under control. Break craving cycles. If your refrigerator becomes magnetic every night at 8 o'clock, don't be home. Or make sure it's empty. Don't depend on willpower. You have to break free from the cycle. Be somewhere else. Arrange to go to the movies. And by the way, have your friends guide you away from the snack bars. If it's a monthly cycle, a low-fat vegan diet actually reduces premenstrual cravings. That is, if it's totally vegan, if it is very low in fat. We published a paper on manipulating estrogen levels in women who had severe menstrual pain. We published this 3 years ago in Obstetrics and Gynecology. If any of you would like more details on that, I'd be glad to show you. But we did it to curb menstrual cramps, and it is surprising how well it works when you do it right. But it also diminishes PMS and cravings. Regular exercise and rest is so important. Danny was talking about this earlier, and it is really true. How many of us spend all day at our computer or inside at a desk, and at night you lie down to sleep and you're not really tired? Your brain might be a little bit wired and stressed, but your body isn't tired, so you don't really sleep as well. If your body is tired because you've exercised, you sleep better, you wake up more rested and more in control the next day. If you had a lousy night's sleep, is this not true? If you had a lousy night's sleep, when we get up in the morning, we will do anything just to be able to function. So whatever good resolve we had, we throw it away. So exercise and rest are key. Some folks have a glass of wine or a beer to fall off to sleep. It works at the beginning of the night, but for those of you who do this, what happens about 4:30 in the morning? You wake up, all the worries of the world come back to you, and the reason is your liver converts alcohol into another chemical called aldehyde. It's an aldehyde. I don't mean Dr. Jekyll and aldehyde. What I mean to say is, it's just as alcohol is a sedative, the aldehydes are stimulants, and they wake you up. Use social supports. If your family changes their diet with you, it makes life so much easier than if they stand in your way. Now, they will not listen to you because they know you. So if you say, honey, you ought to go vegetarian, they just know you're pushing your message on them. So you have to lead them to somebody else's work. They will, Hans Diehl's work or my work or Dean Ornish's work, they'll read that and they'll be convinced by it. But bring them along and you'll find that it is so much easier. Whether you're exercising, whether you're changing your diet, we change so much easier when we're in groups. And finally, take advantage of other motivators. There are so many folks who will compromise their health if they are the only one who will pay for it. But once you're married, or you have a significant other, or especially once you have kids, the guy who will not drive drunk at 150 miles an hour down the road isn't really doing it for himself. He knows he's got to be there for his kids. And so we can use that kind of motivator. If we're using the wrong foods in our routine, we may not be there to annoy our grandchildren. So we have a moral duty to be there, and that means using the foods that keep us around a longer period of time. And what does that mean? It means what we call the new 4 food groups. When I was a kid, we grew up with the old 4 food groups, which is what, hamburgers, French fries, Coke, and ketchup, or something like that. Anyway, the new 4 food groups are grains, legumes, vegetables, and fruits. In any variety. I like to always encourage people to add a daily multiple vitamin for vitamin D, which naturally comes from the sunlight. But if you're indoors all day long and you're not getting sun, the vitamin will cover you, and vitamin B12. Now, it doesn't have to be a multiple vitamin if you're getting it from some other supplemental source, but I show this for anyone who thinks, I'm going to miss out on things on a vegan diet. Exactly the opposite is true. When we measure nutrient intake in vegans, they have so many advantages over people who are not vegetarian. Their fiber intake is much higher. Their vitamin C intake is much higher. They get more beta-carotene, more of all the antioxidants. And if you look at certain minerals like iron, it's higher too, thanks to the green leafy vegetables and the beans that they're getting. But when we travel, or just as part of day-to-day life, multiple vitamin will cover you for anything that you may be missing. Now, what if we want to make this kind of change? What do? I have what I call my 3-week test. And that is, we're not making any decision for the rest of our lives. That sounds too daunting. We're doing it for just 3 weeks. So what I suggest you do is, if you're thinking, well, maybe this is true, maybe I could get my cholesterol down, or Dr. Barnard is doing this research study that says maybe we can reverse diabetes, well, maybe I'd like to do that, or I'd like to get my blood pressure down. Take 3 weeks, use the new 4 food groups, and before you start, try out some recipes so that when the 3 weeks arrives, you're ready. Now, here are a few that are in my book, but there are many, many others. These are just Joanne Stepaniak, who some of you know, who is wonderful at simulating the taste of chocolate and cheese and all those seductions, provided me these recipes, and I'll show them to you if you like, for healthy breakfasts, healthy lunches, and dinners. Once you try them out, see which ones you like, or figure out what you can have at a restaurant or what you can have at a fast food place, which by the way, you can find. There are healthy choices out there. Then do it 100%. What I'm saying is this: don't stick your toe in that swimming pool. If you're trying out a healthy diet, don't just sort of dabble with it. Jump in. Really try it out. Do it 100%. Why? Because when I was a medical student, I hate to say this, but it's true, I used to smoke cigarettes. And yes, I did. I used to go down to the radiology department, and I'd get my lung cancer x-rays, and I'd be looking at them, smoking my Merit menthols, going, isn't that terrible? Well, the reason I tell you this is I wasn't a dummy. I knew I had to quit smoking. But I was under so much stress that I thought, well, for now, maybe I'll just cut down. Any of you ever try this? How long does that last? About a half hour, right? And then you're back up to a pack a day. Okay, the same is true. If you are a dedicated cheese lover or meat eater, I guarantee you, if you keep that taste alive by teasing yourself with it day after day, it's so much easier to just break it completely. You miss chocolate less if you haven't had it for 3 weeks than if you had it yesterday. You miss meat less if you haven't had it for 3 weeks than if you had it yesterday. When a person is going from whole milk to skim milk, the first 2 or 3 days they go, this doesn't taste right. It's watery. It doesn't even look quite right. After 3 weeks, what happens? You're totally used to it. And then somebody gives you whole milk, and then what? How does that taste? It's sickening. It tastes like paint. It's like cream. You can't have it anymore. Now, I'm not saying skim milk is health food. You want to go further. Go to soy milk or rice milk or plain water, which is the only beverage your body really needs. But the reason I suggest this is that when we lighten the entire diet, 3 weeks is an approachable period of time. That psychologically lets us do it. But at the end of 3 weeks, I know what's going to happen. Your taste buds will change. I'm only doing this for 3 weeks, but at the end of 3 weeks, if you have a double bacon monster burger, it really will not taste wonderful anymore. You'll think, why was I ever doing that again? So that's the 3-week trick. It's really important. Use the new 4 food groups. Test out my recipes or any other recipes. You're going to love the ones you see in my books, I hope, because they were done by Jennifer Raymond or Joanne Stepaniak, who are real culinary geniuses. But there are many, many choices. Get them together, then do it 100%. Don't cheat at all. Get your family going with you, and that's the answer. That will bring you some success. Now, let me share one other thing. This is something my mom showed me. My mother is just about to turn 80, and she still lives with my father in Fargo. And she had a very high cholesterol level and would not listen to a word that I said about it. I kept telling her, Mom, you've got to do something, but she just ignored me. And I think the reason is that I'm her third-born child. For any of you who have kids, you know what I'm talking about. The first child comes along, and everything that little baby utters, you write it down. Nonsense syllables, you'll call grandma and tell them what the baby said. And when the child takes the first steps, you take pictures and pictures and pictures and put them all in photo albums, page after page after page. Second child comes along. You've been there, you've done that, you've seen what babies do. It's not so exciting. When your third child comes along, your kid can be looking you in the eyes saying, Mom, you've got atherosclerosis. This is hypercholesterolemia. She just thinks it's cute, you know these big words. She's not listening. So my mother ignored all of my advice. Anyway, finally she went to see her cardiologist, who said, Mrs. Barnard, you're in trouble. You have a dangerously high cholesterol level, and I'm putting you on some medication. And she said, okay, well, how long do I have to take these pills for? And the cardiologist said, I don't think you understand. You're going to be on this drug for the rest of your life. To lower my cholesterol, she said? Yes, that's the idea. She said, hold on. She went home, and she picked up a book that I wrote called Food for Life. And she said, Neal kept telling me that if I make these recipes, my cholesterol would fall. And so she did it. She did it for 6 weeks. She never cheated at all, and she went back to the doctor, who looked at her lab test and scratched his head and said, I think we have an error in our laboratory. Her cholesterol had dropped 80 points. No drugs, just the diet changes. I got to tell you, my mother walks out of there, the light bulb has gone off in her head, she races home, she picks up the phone, she calls me up and says, Neal, why didn't you tell me about this before? So, anyhow, she decides this is it. My father is going to become a vegan. So, I have to tell you, my dad grew up on a cattle ranch. But my dear dad has been, he doesn't know where the kitchen is in the house. He's been sitting at the dining room table for 55 years. And the food comes in, my mom makes it, he eats it, the plates go away, and that's the system. So she goes to the health food store, and she buys some products that are good. If you have not tried these, health food stores have changed. You know, it used to be that everyone inside them had tie-dyed shirts, and their name was Sunshine, and they were playing folk music, and the products were dusty. And if you bought soy milk, it was a powder. Do you remember that? You had to mix it up real quick and then pour it on your cereal before it precipitated. Well, and if you had a veggie burger, it was this gooey stuff that was like bready thingy, and you had to, it was horrible. Anyway, something happened. Health food stores, it's like stores on steroids. They're enormous. They have more products than you can imagine. They have, and my mom's buying all this stuff. They have hot dogs called not dogs. They have deli slices called phony bologna, and Canadian bacon and ham and turkey slices and chicken slices and everything, all made of soy or wheat derivatives or other things. There's no meat in them at all. They're totally vegan. She arrives home with sacks of this and makes my father a bologna sandwich with slices of tomatoes and Dijon mustard, and he thinks it's fine. And he's, a little bit lighter taste, but he remembers when she did the whole milk to skim milk thing with him, so it's something like that. I got to tell you, he's been happily eating these foods now for years, and I've got 2 vegetarian parents, and only one of them knows it. So, the point that I'm making, is do this in your own family. It is not enough for us to be healthy as individuals. My mom is the vegan police now. Last Christmas, my sister has a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old, and my older brother has college-age kids. They're all home. And my mother will not allow a McDonald's bag anywhere inside. And it's the most wonderful. They're not vegans, they're not even vegetarian, but when they're in Fargo, they are. And you know what? My mom says, in some households, people aren't quite so pushy as I am. My husband is not going to die of a heart attack. My kids are not going to die of these diseases if I have anything to say about it. And if my grandkids need to learn what fresh roots and vegetables taste like because I serve them here, that's what we're going to do. And you know what the kids do? They don't complain. They go in the kitchen and she'll say, would you please cut up this? She shows them how to do it. Would you tear up the lettuce? The little kids can do these things. They get engaged in it. And for the first time in their lives, they're talking about the foods and what they do in their bodies. And they leave there trading recipes, trading tastes, trading successes and failures. You can have duds. That's what experimenting is all about. But you also have some things that turn out pretty good. And their lives are changed. If we change only for ourselves, we're not tackling the problem that we have in this country, which is that America is now in the worst shape physically that we have ever been in. And the kids today in school, is this not true? They are more out of shape than any generation we have ever had. And if you could look, I don't just mean standing on the scale, yes. Partly from a lack of physical activity, partly because they're watching television, partly because of what is served them in the schools, partly because of the snack food places that they pass on the way home, partly because of advertising. All of these things conspire against parents. It's a tough way to go. But we can change things. Now, at the Physicians Committee, we have projects to reform school lunches, and by the way, I would invite you to join us in doing this. We have 5,000 physicians, but we have about 100,000 supporting members. And I'd encourage you to join us. If you get on the web, even whether you are a member or not, we have something called Breaking Medical News, where I will send you the latest research findings that come out, usually before you read about them in the paper, some of which you will never read about. Just go to our website, which is pcrm.org. Click on Breaking Medical News. In fact, I have one coming out on Wednesday about a new study that is coming out in the New England Journal. You'll hear about it here first. If we don't do this, if we keep all of this message to ourselves, we're not going to change the course of anybody's life. But if we, in our own humble ways, share the information that we have with other people, we can really change the course of this whole planet. And that's what we're doing together. And I want to thank you for letting me be a small part of doing this with you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Can I take some questions? Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. We have a little time for some questions. If anybody has questions, would you like to come up here to the front and? Oops. Okay.
Give you this, Christian. We'll do a short question and answer period because I know we have lunch also. So if you have a question, go ahead and come up front and ask Dr. Barnard the question that you have.
I would like to know why somebody hasn't gone to these fast food places and require, with the government's help, require them to make it the buns that they eat at least have a portion of wheat, whole wheat in them, or barley or something. Let's make them eat this when they get a burger.
Look to the audience.
Oh, that's it.
So the question is, why can't we have healthier foods in the fast food restaurants? And
Require them to put good food in those buns.
yes. Why can't we require the fast food restaurants to serve healthier foods, require them to put whole grains in the buns and so forth? I think that's what we need to do. It's not a nutritional issue. There's no question that it would be better. The problem is entirely a political one, that it's the industries. There's a reason why the government works with Wendy's and Burger King to promote cheese. It's because the dairy lobby is a whole lot bigger than the fruits and vegetables lobby, but that's got to change.
Right. You know, Dr. Barnard, we got this book signing and we got lunch going, and we're going to lose all the people to go to lunch, and I want them to be able to get a copy of his book. He's going to sign those books. So remember that. And Dr. Deal's going to go back there and sign. I think we need to have you back next year. We need to have you give 2 talks. To need to have you have question and answer period. Want to do that? Because I know they're going to need to eat. And fabulous, absolutely fabulous.
Thank you, Neal. Dr. Barnard is not only an outstanding researcher, a kind, gentle speaker, but a man with a cutting edge when it comes to representing consumers in Washington. Did you get that? But he's also very practical. And you want to take advantage of his book, 7 Practical Steps of How to Break Our Addiction. I believe in this book. If you don't believe what I'm saying, read the back page. There's my endorsement. Also, you want to know that his organization is one of the national sponsors of the CHIP program. So we appreciate Neal very, very much. And we would like to see all of those that are interested in learning more about how to become directors and leaders in the CHIP program, meet me back at the table where I will be with Dr. Barnard. Dr. Barnard will be signing his book, and I want to see some of you that are interested in coming to a special 5-day training program to become CHIP leaders in Vancouver this coming November. So if you're interested, I will be at the table with Dr. Barnard, my dear friend. Let's give him a hand once more, and thank you.
We hope you have enjoyed this presentation and have gained a blessing from the information contained in it. From all of us here at Modern Manna Ministries, may God richly bless you.
It's now time for the exhibits and for lunch. That'll be until 2:45, so be here a little bit before 2:45 as Dr. John McDougall explains the McDougall Plan for the 21st century.